On the night of December 13th, Nick Reiner walked out of Conan O'Brien's Christmas party after a loud argument with his father. By the next afternoon, both his parents were dead. Here's the sequence. Just after midnight, a gas station camera a few blocks from the house catches him on the sidewalk. At 4 in the morning, he checks into a hotel in Santa Monica, miles away, under his own name. And around 3:30 that afternoon, Rob and Michele Reiner are found dead in their bedroom. The hotel staff noticed nothing wrong when he checked in, but later that same morning, housekeeping opened the room and found the shower full of blood and the sheets pulled down over the windows. That evening, roughly 15 miles from home, a convenience store camera picks him up. Red backpack over one shoulder, he grabs a drink, gets in line, shifting foot to foot, head on a swivel. Minutes later, a police cruiser rounds the corner and blocks him in on the sidewalk. Officers step out with their guns drawn, and Nick's hands go straight up. No struggle, no panic.
11 at night. A gas station camera catches a man in a baseball cap walking past. He's not leaving the neighborhood. He's heading back toward it, back toward his parents' house. And here's the thing, his mother and father are still at the party when that camera rolls. They don't know he's ahead of them. They don't know what's waiting when they get home. They did everything right to keep the danger out. The gate, the private street, the cameras, the quiet, gated corner of Los Angeles where nothing bad is supposed to reach you. None of it mattered, because the danger that night wasn't outside the walls. It was already inside, in the quiet, waiting for the sound of the car, waiting for the lights to go out. Two Hollywood legends went to sleep in the one place they felt safest, and the person waiting for them was the son they raised. Hit subscribe to follow this case as it moves, and drop your location in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, because what happened that night didn't begin at the party. It began years earlier, inside a family that spent almost everything trying to save one of its own. To understand how a family gets here, you have to understand what this family was. Rob Reiner was one of those names that lived in the background of everybody's life, whether they realized it or not. If you grew up watching television, you knew his face before you knew his name. He played the son-in-law on one of the biggest shows this country ever made, the guy who argued at the dinner table every week in front of 20 million people. And then he stopped acting, and he went behind the camera, and somehow he got even bigger. Think about the movies you've quoted without knowing who made them. The love story people still put on every fall. The fantasy one kids grew up memorizing line for line. The courtroom one where the whole thing comes down to a man on the stand losing it. That was him. That was Rob. He built a life most people only see from the outside. And the woman he built it with was named Michele, a photographer, a producer. They met on the set of one of his films, married and stayed married for more than 30 years. People who knew them didn't describe them the way you'd expect two Hollywood people to be described. They talked about warmth. They talked about how the Reiners remembered your name, sent the card, checked in. One friend called Rob a bundle of love, and meant it. They had 3 kids, Jake, Nick, and Romy, and they had money, real money. The kind of estate that gets talked about in the hundreds of millions. A home in Brentwood, one of the quietest, most protected corners of Los Angeles. A place with a gate and a guest house and a tennis court. From the outside, it looked like the finish line. It looked like a family that had already won, but there was a middle child, and this is really his story.
Sometimes I just come out to gather my sick thoughts.
Nick was born in the early 90s, and from the beginning, people around the family say Nick was different, not in a small way. There's a woman who used to come to the house to teach the family yoga back when Nick was a boy, and years later, she wrote about him. She described a kid full of enormous energy, so much of it that one day, she says, he sent a vase flying across the room.
I think I started with the TV, and then I went over to the lamp, and then everything in the guest house got wrecked.
She said she'd never quite seen a child like that. Now that's one person's memory of a small boy, and I'll let it be exactly that. But it's the earliest version of something that a lot of people would go on to describe. That Nick ran a little hotter than everyone around him. That he was intense in a way the family kept trying to manage. And then came his teenage years, and things stopped being manageable. Nick was around 14, 15 when the drugs started, and this wasn't experimentation that faded. By his own account, he was in his first treatment program at 15 years old. 15. An age where most kids are worried about a driver's permit, and this kid is already inside a facility, already carrying a word like addict. And that was only the beginning of a cycle that would define the next decade of his life. Because Nick didn't go to rehab once. He didn't go 5 times. By the time he was in his early 20s, the number people around him used was 17. Some estimates later put it higher. In and out. Over and over, all across the country. He said it plainly in an interview once. He said he spent nights on the street. He spent weeks on the street. And it was not fun. Sit with that for a second. A kid from one of the most comfortable families in Los Angeles. A family that could give him anything out on the street in another state entirely. Because the thing pulling at him was stronger than any of it. And his parents did not walk away. This is the part that runs through everything. Whatever else you believe about this family, they did not give up on him. They put him through program after program, some of them costing tens of thousands of dollars a month. Rob would later say they were desperate, that they leaned on the experts, the people with the diplomas on the wall, and did whatever those people told them to do, even when it went against their own gut. Michele said the same thing, in her own words, that they'd tried everything, that they didn't know what else there was to do. And for a while, it looked like the trying paid off. Around 2015, Nick got clean, or clean enough, and something happened that seemed to change the whole story. Nick and his father made a movie together, and not just any movie. It was about a young man drowning in addiction, and the difficult, aching relationship between that young man and his father. Nick co-wrote it, Rob directed it. It was, in a way, their own lives handed back to the world with the names changed. And the way they talked about making it, you'd have thought the wound had finally closed. Rob said working on that film with his son was like being in therapy together. He said Nick was the heart and soul of the whole thing, that he looked to him for honesty, for truth. Nick, for his part, said he understood his father better than he ever had, that he'd gotten to watch him do the thing he loved most, up close. He called them loving, supportive parents. Rob even talked about the regret underneath it all. He said something you don't forget once you've heard it. He said, "We listened to the people with the diplomas when we should have been listening to our son." That's a father who spent years looking for the answer everywhere except the one place, and thought, finally, he'd found his way back. For a stretch of time, that was the picture. A family that had gone through the fire and come out the other side. The son who nearly didn't make it, and the parents who refused to let go, standing together, promoting a movie about exactly that. It was the ending everybody wanted. But an ending isn't the same thing as the truth. And in the years after that movie, the picture the family showed the world, and whatever was actually happening behind that gate, started to drift apart. Because the reconciliation everyone celebrated, it didn't hold the way it looked like it would. And by the final months, the people closest to the family say the fear had crept back in. Let me tell you what those last months looked like. In the years after that movie, Nick mostly disappeared from public view. There's a stretch where even the people who follow these things closely say they don't really know what he was doing. He'd moved back onto his parents' property by the end, living in the guest house. And the reason for that, according to people close to the family, wasn't just convenience. It was so they could keep an eye on him, so they could watch. Because the fear had come back. Friends of the family say Rob and Michele had grown scared again in the final stretch. Scared for Nick. Scared that whatever had been holding him together was slipping. One friend put it in a way that stays with you. They said these poor people did everything to help this kid, and here's where the story splits. And I want to be honest with you about that, because it matters. There's one account that says Nick was falling apart in those last weeks, that his behavior had turned strange and stressful and hard to be around, that something in him had changed. And then there's another account that says the opposite. A man who worked closely with Rob for years, a friend, stayed at the house just a couple of weeks before the end. 5 days under that roof. And the way he described it, everything looked fine. Nick looked good. He was sitting with the family, eating dinner with them, taking out the garbage, washing dishes, bringing him something to drink. Normal, he said. A lot of love in that house. He didn't notice anything off at all.
I'm broken. This is surreal. I'm just devastated.
Did Rob ever say to you that he feared for his safety at all?
Never. They may have had arguments, but I never saw any violence.
Two people, both close to the family, describing what seems like two completely different young men. And they can't both be the whole picture. Hold on to that because it never fully resolves. What isn't in dispute is the night everything ended. It was a Saturday in the middle of December. Rob and Michele had been invited to a Christmas party. A big one, hosted by one of the most famous comedians in the country, up in the hills. The kind of party where the room is full of people you'd recognize. Nick wasn't invited. His parents asked if they could bring him. Think about what that request means. They didn't want to go without him. Or maybe they didn't feel they could leave him home. Either way, they brought their son to a party he wasn't asked to because the alternative felt worse. And at that party, according to the people who were there, Nick was not okay. He was moving around the room, walking up to people he didn't know, asking them the same strange thing. What's your name? What's your last name? Are you famous? He was staring. Guests were unsettled. Some of them didn't even seem to know who he was. And at one point, he approached another well-known guest, interrupted a private conversation, and when he was told it was private, he just stood there, staring, for a long moment, before he walked off. People at that party were uncomfortable enough that, by some accounts, the idea of calling for help came up. And then Nick's father did what a father does. He pulled his son aside. He told him the behavior wasn't okay, that this was someone else's home, that he couldn't act like this here. And it turned into an argument, a loud one, loud enough that people noticed, loud enough to be embarrassing. Rob and Michele apologized to their host, and they left. That's the last time most of these people would see them.
Experience is saying goodnight to somebody and having them leave and then find out the next day that they're gone. I think I was in shock for quite a while afterwards.
Now here's where the timeline gets quiet, and the quiet is the part that unsettles people. At 16 minutes past midnight, a camera at a gas station a few blocks from the Reiner home picks up a man in a baseball cap, carrying a backpack, on foot. His parents, at that moment, are still out. They haven't come home yet. So, picture this. The argument ends. The parents stay a little longer, or take their time, or drive home embarrassed. And their son is already out there, ahead of them, somewhere in the dark near that gated street. While they're still at a party, he's already close to home. And this is where you hit the fork in this whole story, the one nobody can close for you. There's the version most people reach for first. They fought at the party. He was humiliated. He followed them home and it exploded right there in the heat of it. Ugly and human, and the kind of thing people can almost understand. And then there's the other version, the one where the fight is already over, where he goes home ahead of them into a dark and empty house. And he waits for the sound of the car in the drive, waits for the lights to go out. Those two versions lead to very different places, and the only two people who could tell you which one is true are the two people who never woke up. What we know is this. Sometime in the hours after that party, inside the master bedroom, Rob and Michele were attacked. There was no break-in, no forced entry, no sign that anyone came over that wall or through that gate. It happened in the one room in the house where you let your guard all the way down, where you close your eyes and trust the dark. And at around 4:15 in the morning, a man checked into a hotel by the water in Santa Monica, a few miles south, under his own name. The staff at the desk later said he looked off, but not alarming. Nothing that made them stop him. They had no idea what the morning would reveal about that room. The discovery didn't come until the next afternoon, Sunday. A massage therapist had an appointment scheduled at the Reiner home. She arrived, rang the bell, knocked, waited. Nobody came, so she left. Across the street lived Romy, their daughter. She noticed her parents weren't answering, weren't reachable, and something about that was wrong enough that she walked over, let herself in, and went looking for them. She found her father first. And in one of the most heartbreaking details in this entire story, she didn't even realize at first that her mother was there too, that both of them were gone. It was so far beyond anything a person is built to process that the truth arrived in pieces. She ran, screaming, and a call went out for help in the middle of that Sunday afternoon. When help arrived, they found both Rob and Michele in the bedroom. They had been stabbed multiple times, and it was, by every account, brutal. This wasn't quick or clean or distant. A knife is the most personal thing there is. You have to be right there, close. To do that to another person takes something most people will never have to look at in their lives. And almost immediately, attention turned to the guest house, to the son who lived on the property, to the young man who'd argued with his father in front of a room full of people just hours before. By then, Nick was already gone from the hotel, but the room he'd left behind told its own story. There was blood in the shower. Sheets had been pulled over the windows, blocking the view in. A second location now, miles from the house, tied into the same terrible night. They tracked him across the city. That evening, a camera caught him again, this time near a convenience store in another part of Los Angeles, 15 miles from home. He walks in, buys a drink, walks back out, and when officers moved in on him, out in the open, he didn't run. He didn't fight. By the accounts of what that footage showed, he simply put his hands up and went down. Calm, compliant, like he already knew it was over. And that calm is its own kind of haunting. Because whatever had happened in that bedroom, the man on that footage isn't panicking. He isn't fleeing into the night. Which brings us back to the question underneath the whole thing. The gap between the two versions of that night. The fight that spilled over, and the quiet that was already waiting in the dark. Because if this was a son who snapped, the calm doesn't quite fit. And if it was something colder, something that had time to think, then the calm fits all too well. There was no confession, no neat explanation handed to anyone, just a family destroyed, a son in custody, and a city trying to understand how the safest house on the safest street ended the way it did. And that's when the harder questions started. Not what happened, but why, and whether the young man who lived in that guest house even understood what he'd done. In the days after, a picture of Nick started to form from the edges. Sources close to the family said he'd been diagnosed with a serious mental illness in the weeks before, and that a change in his medication had left him agitated, not himself, out of his head. That's the version that says he was sick. Too sick, maybe, to know what he was doing. But remember the friend who stayed at the house. 10 days before, he saw none of that. A young man doing dishes, sitting with his family, surrounded by love. 2 accounts that refused to line up, and a whole story living in the space between them. Here's what makes it harder. The people who knew Nick describe someone with a long history behind the illness. Years of anger, aggression that went back to childhood, and drugs, always the drugs, sitting on top of everything else. So even if he was sick, you can't cleanly separate the illness from the substances from the temper. Nobody can. That's the knot at the center of this.
Because I'm a snail and I never gonna fail. And you know what? You're gonna have to bail me out of jail.
Then came the part that stopped people cold. From a jail cell, charged with the deaths of his parents, Nick asked a court for money, a trust his mother and father had set up for him back when he was a baby. Money he was supposed to receive at 30 and never got. He wanted it now, to pay for his defense, against the charge that he killed the 2 people who set that money aside for him. Make it make sense. The lawyer he wanted was one of the most famous defense attorneys in the country, a man who'd walked into this case early, then walked right back out when the money didn't come, saying only that the reasons were beyond his control, and beyond Nick's. Now, if the trust comes through, he says he's ready to return. So that's where it sits. A son in custody, a fortune his parents built, and a fight over whether the man accused of ending their lives should be handed what they left behind. Here's the thing about this case. Everybody wants it to be simple. He was sick. He wasn't in his right mind. Or he knew exactly what he was doing and did it anyway. People want one door or the other. Clean. But this family lived in the space between those doors for 20 years. The love was real. The trying was real. 18 trips to rehab. A movie made out of the wreckage. A father saying he should have listened to his son. All of it real. And it still ended in that bedroom. Maybe that's the part we don't want to look at. That you can do everything right, love a person all the way down, spend a fortune and a lifetime trying to save them, and still lose. Not because you failed. Because some things don't answer to love. 2 people who gave the world so much are gone. A daughter found them. A son sits in a cell. And a brother wrote that he still wakes up every morning and has to convince himself it isn't a dream. It isn't. And the one question everyone keeps circling, the one that separates a man who snapped from a man who waited in the dark, remains exactly where it started, with the 2 people who can't answer it. We're going to keep watching this one closely. There's a hearing still ahead over that trust, and a long road before a courtroom ever hears a word about what happened in that house. When those answers come, we'll bring them to you carefully, the way we always do. We don't run ahead of the evidence. Not here. If you want it straight, without the noise, subscribe and hit the bell. That way you hear it from us first, the moment it moves. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. The son at that party, asking strangers if they were famous, then home in the dark before his parents ever pulled through the gate. Do you see a man who lost his mind that night? Or a man who was waiting? I read them, and what y'all drop shapes which case we pick up next. If you made it this far, tell me where you are watching from tonight. This has been Hidden Case Detective. We do not let these cases die.